Today, a 2-year-old was mauled to death by two Rottweilers at an unlicensed daycare center in Georgia. And while outrage focuses on the breed, the real issue is that the United States of America leads the developed world in child death caused by untrained adults owning deadly assets. Guns are the number one cause of death for American children, and dogs rank fourth among the deadliest animals to humans on Earth, after mosquitoes, snakes, and other humans. Neither dog or guns require training, neither require licensings, and both are treated as rights and not as responsibilities. I wrote about this, how systemic negligence and cultural mythology make these deaths inevitable. And any call to licensed dog ownership here fails because in America you can buy a semi-automatic weapon faster than you can adopt a rescue dog. So I began to wonder why Americans behave like a nation of deeply traumatized children that are like clinging to power, terrified of control, and mistaking fear for freedom. Why this dangerous worship of individual rights with little regards for collective responsibility? Why American culture fetishizes freedom, but in practice it often looks like fear-driven control? The obsession with gun rights and the lack of rails around dog ownership comes from the same place. Again, I written a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, about how these common sense proposals, like requiring licensing or behavioral education before owning a high-risk breed, are instantly dead in the water here. And not because they're ineffective, but because we can't regulate dogs without admitting we failed to regulate people. And any effort to improve public safety around dogs runs in the same political wall as gun reform, a reflexive panic that control equals oppression. So instead, we bury the victims, blame the dog, and wait for it to happen again. But again, why? Why Americans behave like this? And there are 6 reasons that I wrote down now. Reason number 1 is the frontier myth. America was born on the frontier where survival depended on self-sufficiency and violence was routine. And gun became this moral tool, a symbol of autonomy, masculinity, and moral virtue. And the mythology of this self-made armed individual still shapes American psyche today. Number 2, the anti-tyranny as a founding narrative. The revolution against Britain entrenched the idea that weapons were the safeguard against tyranny. And the Second Amendment wasn't just about defense, it was about distrust. While other democracies built legitimacy through institutions, America built it through resistance to authority. And number 3, race, control, and fear. Guns have always been tied to race and power. And after the Civil War, armed white militias enforced the racial order with guns. And later the image of the armed black men during the civil rights, Black Panthers for example, terrified the white America and helped spark the modern conservative gun movement. The fear of the other, whether it's racial, cultural, the government itself, became this backbone of American gun identity. And there is reason number 4, neoliberalism and the distrust of the state again. So in the 80s, the shrinking safety nets and rising inequalities left people feeling abandoned, and the gun industry filled that void and selling fear as freedom. So the good guy with a gun became a moral archetype. Self-reliance turned into isolation marked as patriotism. And then there is that masculine anxiety that traditional roles and communities collapsed, and firearms became this symbol of control in this uncertain world. And gun ownership shifted from practical defense to performance, open carry arms and shit like that. And then there is my favorite reason, which is you guys have no memory of war. Unlike Europeans, you guys haven't seen modern war and its own brutality on your own soil. That distance led it to romanticize violence instead of learning from it. So where other nations built institutions to contain force, America built myths of cowboys, Minutemen, and lone defenders. So in essence, America's obsession with firearms without licensing isn't just about policy or rights. It's about mythology, trauma, and identity. The gun stands at the crossroad of self-reliance, fear, and rebellion, and is such a relic of a society that still defines freedom not as a shared security, but as an individual control through force.